is if my dear friend King heard Mordecai Johnson and he read Gandhi, why didn't he adopt some of that language to the boycott from the very beginning? And see, I suspect, and there are some people in our freedom movement who say that in actual fact, Gandhi and nonviolence entered the whole campaign with my life and my work. That I use Gandhi as a clear example all the time from 1958. His thinking, Jesus' thinking, all molded what I talk about. And I justify that because I know that Gandhi and the social scientists who say that if you're going to create a movement of social change, social justice, that however you have to be within the spiritual, moral, intellectual, social, cultural geography of the people among whom you're working. That you can't force upon them strange stuff. So in the King Parks movement, or the Parks King movement, or campaign, or dimension of the civil rights movement, we were very much within that grasp. Black folk were deeply in a despairing mood concerning the racism that was considered the freedom of speech in the United States. Where we could hear political figures express their racism publicly in Congress, in the governor's mansions, the James Eastland, the James Bilbos, and the Henry Russells. We heard this stuff in the 40s and the 50s. And the United States said that was freedom of speech. That's one of the problems today that's still going on intellectually. The way in which the power structures identify the First Amendment as meaning you can have hate speech. That is legitimate speech. And that's what we have not cleared up yet. We black people, we black folk in 1930, 1940, though I was a kid, a baby, an infant in 1930, we black folk, my parents, generally considered all racist nuances as being not free speech, but unholy speech, sinful speech. See, that's a big difference between black religion and white religion emergence in the United States. We knew this speech we knew that speech to be sinful, and many, many preachers in the black community said that. There was no kind of playing around with it. It was First Amendment advocates that pretended that kind of hate speech was legitimate speech in the public arena and private arena. The black community never agreed to that. And I'm sure the Japanese community did not, the Chinese community. I know the Mexican American community did not agree with the notion that racist speech was ordinary and justified conversation.
I had a question about some Japanese, Chinese, and you had mentioned that we're living in the shadow of the Cold War, but also World War II. And, sorry, maybe could you go to the, I wanted to read you something that Gandhi wrote, and it's an essay called Nonviolence and World Crisis. And he has something very important to say about the role of Jews, Germans, and Chinese. And he says, in my opinion, nonviolence is not passivity in any shape or form. Nonviolence, as I understand it, is an activist force in the world. Therefore, whether it is materialism or anything else, if nonviolence does not provide an effective antidote, it is not the active force of my conception. Or to put it conversely, if you bring me some conundrums that I cannot answer, I would say my nonviolence is still defective. Nonviolence is the supreme law, and he says, take the question of the Jews on which I have written. No Jew need feel helpless if he takes to the nonviolent way. A friend has written me a letter objecting that in an article I have assumed that the Jews have been violent. It is true that the Jews have not been actively violent in their own persons, but they called upon the Germans, the curses of mankind, and they wanted America and England to fight Germany on their behalf. If I hit my adversary, that is of course violence, but to be truly nonviolent, I must love him and pray for him, even if it means, even when he has, sorry, I can't make that out. The Jews have not been actively nonviolent in spite of their misdeeds to the dictators. What about China, you ask? The Chinese have no designs upon other people. They have no desire for territory. True, perhaps, China is not ready for such aggression. Perhaps what looks like her pacifism is only indolence. In any case, China's is not active nonviolence. Her putting up a valiant defense against Japan is proof enough that China was never intentionally nonviolent. So he has this critique of world history as it's developing, and how I think right now, it seems to me that the Jews, the European Jews, are often prioritized in how the history of World War II is told. And here Gandhi is offering a criticism of that way of looking at what happened. So I wonder if you can comment on the Jewish question, to recall Marx, and how Gandhi saw it, and how King saw it, perhaps.
Well, I stand with Gandhi in his analysis pretty clearly. That's where in many ways I stand. The Jewish community has not been pacifist. In Europe, it tended to be more passive than actively in opposition, though there were also lots of opposition within the Jewish community. The USA Jewish community has been far more activist than anywhere else in the world. So that needs to be said. The fourth major wave of nonviolent action in the 60s was 1962, when Albany, Georgia sought to desegregate public life in Albany. The media universally called that a failure. But when you talk to Charles Sherrard or or people in Albany, Robert Anderson, who was the chair of that struggle, and he was a medical person. He later had to flee. He later had to leave Albany, became a professor at Michigan State in the medical school. But they all say it was not a failure. I say it was not a failure. One of the important things that happened in Albany, Georgia was that the black community said, we no longer have to put up with segregation, and we're not going to do so. We're not going to put up with this hostility. Though they did not get a major agreement in the first 6 months or first 12 months of the Albany movement, even the white leadership, and especially the business leadership and the police leadership, knew that segregation was over in Albany. that the hostility, the signs, the lack of work and jobs was over. So that's what Gandhi partially means by the fact that nonviolence does and never fails. Among other things, as King talks about it too, there was a new spiritual dignity that sizable numbers of black people in Albany lived out from then on, in which they would continue the personal struggle and the other struggle. Now, so does that partially answer what you're asking?
Yes, the first part, but then, I guess, what is the future, with the relations between Jews and Christians and Hindus and Muslims and here we are.
Well, that's already,
amongst...
that emergence has already happened. It began to happen in the 20th century,
Right.
where you had places in Europe and in the United States where the major religious elements of the world came together in common working efforts within their own localities. That was very true in Europe, but it was also true in the United States. I mean, since '74 in Los Angeles, when we see when I've seen some of the shenanigans of people like Edelson of Las Vegas, the multi-billionaire who's Jewish and who funds a lot of Jewish conservative, racist, right-wing stuff.
On the left hand.
In Los Angeles, my associates at a citywide level included any number of Jewish rabbis who were more critical of him than I was, far more critical. In Los Angeles, we've had for a long time the working together on an interfaith basis with all kinds of people. In the labor movement, for an example, which I helped to organize, I organized a group called Clergy and Laity United Against Economic Injustice, CLUE, we call it. Well, CLUE has brought together local congregations of all kinds to work on the issues of working people who are poor. So we've helped to organize any number of unions, International 11, SEIU, Teamsters, healthcare workers, hotel restaurant people, which I've already named, security workers in Los Angeles around, by 2004 or 5, security workers in the high-rise buildings and the office buildings of central LA and downtown LA were 85% black. And we organized that into one of the largest local unions. And that had multi-religious support across the board. We've just finished, food workers have just finished calling off a strike because they negotiators, but we had in the demonstrations, we had all sorts of religious people engaged, Baptist, Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, who came to the public demonstrations that forged the agreement that union recently has signed. So that work of the religious groups coming together at the local level, there's a lot of that happening. levels of active concern for justice and equality. Not enough. And so I say in that sense, let the local communities where this kind of work is happening be what eventually becomes nationwide or international. And I prefer our using Kingian language for the world rather than global language.
Right.
He speaks of the world house.
The beloved
He speaks of the human race. So I really think that that's better language, more humanistic language, than adopting the global concerns. Let's see, what is it that...
The idiom of globalization, the idiom of neoliberal globalization.
Yeah.
That's
Global citizen. Yeah, I think that's a language that's very seductive.
What?
A language that's quite seductive language.
That's one thing we'll be discussing also, how you don't hear the language of King, like the beloved community.
Yes.
So much
Yeah.
in discourse.
Well, you may or may not know that the beloved language, the beloved community comes from Isaiah Royce, R-O-I-C-E, philosopher at Harvard at the turn of the 20th century, around 1899 and 1905, 1910. Yeah.
But you were talking right now about economic injustice and what you've been participating in economic injustice. And when we talk about the structures of economic injustice, then you mentioned yesterday plantation, what you call plantation capitalism. And I actually discovered that King, as early as 1951, said that, I'm quoting, "I'm convinced that capitalism has seen its best days in America, and not only in America, but in the entire world. It is a well-known fact that no social institution can survive when it has outlived its usefulness. Thus, this capitalism has done, it has failed to meet the needs of the masses." And I was interested in your own relationship to what you see as an economic system that is more humane and replacing the one we have right now.
Well, much of my work has been really engrossed in the dismantling of the things that are wrong. So I really haven't tried to think or work that much on what are the forms of economic order that will be more just and more humane. I think very strongly that the United States, the economy cannot be changed if we do not have millions and millions of people at the local level in unions lift up the issues that become more not president-centered or trade-centered, but community-centered. So just as I think that local religious organizations must be a major part of the way that democracy takes place. Although European Christians would say to me that, you know, we have pushed hard at helping to get Christian thought into the economies. Christian social democrats, those kinds of parties that have had a fair amount of Christian support, church support in Europe, have tried to humanize the economies, and they've done a better piece of work there than we have done here, by and large. But I still maintain that activism in the United States, and we in the Black community, still have a sizable dismantling process to do of the structures of injustice and inequality. And while I want other people to do this other work of parallel institutions, of course, which is a Gandhian notion, that you have to have people who will do the services that they ought to be able to do in place of the government until you get a government that's doing those services. And there've been a lot of, there's a lot of effort that brought various kinds of issues of stopping the wrong to the foreground in the local communities. But I see the need for nonviolent action and direct action in the United States for the dismantling job, if not for the reconstruction job.
Black Reconstruction.
Beg pardon?
I said Black Reconstruction
Yeah.
and its reversal. Has to be
Well,
worse.
I would say not just Black Reconstruction, but certainly, I mean, in a place like Los Angeles where we have a city now that is 65% Hispanic and only about 12% Black and about 7 or 8% Asian, with a sizable, with the visible growth of an Ethiopian immigrant community going on, and an increasingly visible Nigerian immigrant community going on in Los Angeles. So I don't, in some places, New York would be another example, Portland would be another example. Many cities, you have to have a multi-ethnic, multi-people coalition to have real strength. And I maintain that we are letting white people off the hook, and white leadership off the hook. So that there's a real need to make certain that we're taking the game to the enemy camp.
What do you mean by?
Huh?
What do you mean by letting white leadership off the hook?
I think that we cannot afford movements in the United States that do not intentionally involve white people in our localities. No matter how perplexing that might be, in our organizing of our own troops, we have to bring in white people and get them to work with us in this business. Many do not like it, and many are very, very fearful, but we have to help them cleanse themselves of their sins as well as we ourselves cleanse ourselves of our sins. So I really think the white power brokers must be challenged. That means they must be challenged by the whole community and not by just one fragment of the community.
That's right.
Martin King would say that in Montgomery they had allies who were afraid to come forward, but who secretly were engaged. Well, we have to help them gain the courage to come forward and call for the emergence of the human family in the United States. That is multi-creedal, multicolor, multi-philosophies and theories, but have a common consensus about the ridding of every form of sexism or racism or economic injustice, and the emergence of a society that is more fair, more just, and that increasingly, that does increase in the numbers of people who are able to embrace it and live in it.
I'd like to, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
return to a question that I asked you last night.
Yeah.
And it involves the question of violence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is,
The violence of the state.
Of the state, my
That's
point.
right. That's right.
And, at the very time that Gandhi takes over the Indian National Congress, it's about that same time that you have the Russian Revolution. And with it, and a part of the ideological and intellectual authority that it carries is Lenin's theory of the state, in particular the state and revolution, where he argues that a revolution cannot be successful until the revolutionaries have seized state power, one, and secondly, smashed the bourgeois state, which is the capitalist class's instrument of legitimate violence against the people. Now, on the one side, I was thinking about this all night. On the one side, you could see a commensurability with Gandhian or Kingian thought that, or King in particular, that the most violent nation or the most violent state in the world is the United States. As he said, my own government, the main purveyor of violence. And at that point, he is almost saying what Lenin is saying, that the US state, or the state in general, is an instrument of violence. But it is only in Leninism, to my knowledge, that there is the concept of seizing state power, not reforming the old state, but destroying it, which is a violent act. Although up to that point, even in the Russian Revolution, we could say it was pretty much on the side of the revolutionaries, on the side of the people, a non-violent affair. Strikes, general strikes.
Huge marches through the streets.
Definitely.
Huge marches.
And the class struggle, even in Karl Marx's classical thinking, or even Gramsci, or even Rosa Luxemburg, or any of them, it's pretty much non-violence. Satyagraha. And one could even suggest that Gandhi may have incorporated that experience of the 19th century in his own thinking. But then when it comes to the state, and this is a problem that I think we're having in the free school, an intellectual problem, a theoretical problem. What do advocates of the Gandhian, King, and others assertion, for example, like Diane Nash has said, the greatest invention of the 20th century for social change is nonviolence. But then without a theory of the state, how deep and how permanent can the change be? Lenin, was bold enough to say that all of our efforts would evaporate and could easily be overturned unless we seize state power. I just pose it again, and I'd be interested in how you think about these things.
Can I just add one small thing, Joe? Just also given
Speak up a little bit more.
given what's happened in India, you have a democratic polity, but so much has changed since Gandhi's time. And now you have a right wing that's seized power. And they've even, the forces that have been allowed to come up without like a more strong hold on.
Well, I think that, of course, I think that the Leninist observation for theory is an excellent one. The advance of Western civilization across the earth has been an advance of France and Belgium and Holland and Germany and even Sweden, Great Britain, and so forth. It's been an advance of the empires, and the empires have all produced forms of racism, the gathering of wealth, gathering of domination and control. There's no doubt about all of that. So I think that his analysis means that you have to take over the state. You have to use state power, state governance for the advance of the revolution. So it seems to me that the only major issue, can you take over state power through violence?
Without violence.
And it seems to me that in the modern era, all our civil wars have been handicaps to taking over state power. And I raised the experience I had with the war on poverty in the 60s, where I think Lyndon Johnson tried to put in place a new way of governance, where in the war on poverty, a local non-government agency could organize with the approval of the local government or without the approval, and can receive state, federal dollars to do their work at the local level as a parallel institution. I did that with an agency that we called Memphis Area Project South. That was an anti-poverty agency with workers who organized block by block. And our local government said that there was no poverty in Memphis. And we had one of the largest urban poverty element in the country. As many as 40% of people, largely black, but also many whites, were in poverty. And so we were able to persuade the office of the anti-poverty, the war on poverty offices, Schreiber and others. We couldn't get the approval of our mayor or city commissioners or of the county, and the office approved our programs in Washington in spite of that, in spite of the lack that we got local government consent